Nikki Haley then not mincing her words. She's saying that the Security Council now has to adopt the strongest possible measures to try and bring this crisis to an end.
Well, absolutely, yes. As expected, Nikki Haley very much going on the attack. She is known to use very strong language when needed, something of a pit bull approach since she started taking over the job at the beginning of this year as the US ambassador to the United Nations, and some very strong language, essentially saying that enough is enough. This incremental approach that she said the UN Security Council had been taking over 20 years really now had to end, and the UN needed to move forward on tougher sanctions, which would hopefully bring about the end of this testing. We've been hearing from other ambassadors as well. The Japanese ambassador, Koro Besho, saying that the belligerence and dangerousness of North Korea meant that the Security Council must approve a new resolution that had new robust sanctions measures. At this stage, though, there is not a resolution on the table for the UN Security Council to vote on, although many of the countries, including France, the United Kingdom and those two countries we've just heard from, are calling for a new resolution and a new set of sanctions. It'll be interesting to hear later in the meeting what China and Russia both have to say. Normally China has pushed much more for negotiations rather than sanctions, and Russia has been somewhat cautious about new sanctions, especially when it's Western countries who are calling for them. But at this stage, the hope is that the UN Security Council may be able to put together, work up a new draft resolution that Council members would be able to vote on at some point.
Yeah, you mentioned China and Russia there. The delegate from China is due to speak shortly, and we will listen to what he has to say. But China, many see Beijing as having huge influence over North Korea. China often doesn't vote with the US in these matters. Do we know what China's position is on North Korea after the nuclear test on Sunday?
Well, the big problem with China is that they, of course, are the largest trading partner with North Korea. About 90% of North Korea's trade happens with China. So, yes, the thinking is that Beijing has a very large part to play. And, of course, the US President Donald Trump pushing Beijing to try and do more. However, they seem to be pulling back from North Korea. We've seen this over the last few months. A month ago, at the beginning of August, when a set of sanctions, the latest, was voted on, China did approve that. They voted alongside the US and Russia. Indeed, that was a set of sanctions that the US and China had spent several months working up. So it seems that China wants to take a more hardline approach. However, there is one sticking point. Russia and China are also proposing this separate measure, this joint agreement that would be what they're calling a sanctions for sanctions measure. Pyongyang gets rid of its nuclear and ballistic missile testing, but in return, South Korea and the US dismantles the THAAD missile defense system in South Korea and stops the joint military exercises. So China, although it's saying that yes, it would like to be able to push Pyongyang more, is also saying that it wants the US and South Korea to do something as well, to play their part and to reduce the tensions that they see that they are simply ramping up on the Korean Peninsula.
OK, so we're waiting to see what kind of solutions that the UN comes up with. We know that President Trump has already said that he's considering cutting all trade with any country that has ties or does business with North Korea. I mean, that is a big threat and one that has also angered China.
Absolutely, yes. Of course, that would have some very serious implications in terms of US-China trade. If President Trump made good on his word, that would simply stop. There would be no more trade with the US and China because of China's continued trade with North Korea. That was, of course, is a very bold statement, but one of several that we have seen from President Trump and the Trump administration. We heard from the Defense Secretary, James Mattis, within the last 24 hours. He was saying that there would need to be a massive military response if North Korea were to continue with its nuclear and ballistic missile testing. So the Trump administration is very much looking at other options, ways that it can not just take on the problem of North Korea, but also look at how to pressure other countries to in turn pressure North Korea. So one of those things that they're looking at is whether or not the trade route and the trade with other countries may be a possibility, but it would cause huge problems for the diplomacy between Beijing and Washington if the Trump administration were to push ahead with that plan.